A chance encounter. Shaq's life-changing kindness. The evening had settled over the city, painting the skyline with hues of deep blue and amber. Streets grew quieter as most residents retreated to their homes, leaving behind the bustle that defined daylight hours. A cool breeze carried the faint scent of gasoline and asphalt, weaving through the dimly lit parking lot of a small gas station on the edge of town. Bright neon lights flickered above the pumps, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement below. Shaquille O'Neal pulled his massive black SUV into the lot, the hum of the engine low and steady. His day had been exhausting, filled with business meetings, endorsement discussions, and public appearances that came with being one of basketball's most recognizable legends. All he wanted now was to get home, sink into his custom-sized couch, and rest his tired body. But as he rolled to a stop by one of the pumps, something caught his attention. A figure moved between the cars, a woman, small and visibly pregnant, wearing a worn, oversized uniform with the station's logo faded on the chest. Her movements were slow and deliberate, yet there was a quiet determination in the way she carried herself. She couldn't have been more than 30, but exhaustion had etched fine lines around her eyes that made her appear older. Shaq stepped out of his car, his towering 7 feet 1 inch frame immediately catching the attention of a few nearby customers. A man nudged his companion, whispering excitedly, but Shaq paid no mind to the stolen glances. His eyes remained fixed on the pregnant woman as she approached a nearby sedan, holding a squeegee and a bucket of soapy water, her gaze briefly shifting to the ground when the driver waved her away impatiently. What truly captured Shaq's attention, however, were the 2 children nearby. A boy no older than 6 crouched on the ground, drawing intricate patterns on the concrete with a piece of yellow chalk. Next to him, a little girl, perhaps 3 or 4, was curled up on an old plastic chair, wrapped in a thin, tattered blanket. Her head rested on a makeshift pillow, an empty backpack. The sight stirred something in Shaq, a pang of concern mixed with curiosity. In his years of philanthropy, he'd seen many struggling families, but something about this scene felt particularly raw and unfiltered. This wasn't a charity event with cameras and prepared speeches. This was real life unfolding before him. He watched as the woman moved back toward the gas station after being rejected, her shoulders drooping slightly but not defeated. There was a resilience in her posture that spoke volumes. Shaq moved toward the pump, casually observing her as he filled his tank. When their eyes met briefly, she offered a polite smile, the kind of smile that seemed practiced, a shield against the questions she probably received daily about her children's presence at her workplace. "Excuse me," Shaq called out, his deep voice carrying across the lot. The woman paused, turning toward him with a mixture of caution and professionalism. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, stepping closer, her hand still gripping the squeegee as if it might offer some protection. Up close, Shaq could see the dark circles under her eyes and the way her free hand unconsciously moved to rest on her swollen belly. "Do you work here?" he asked, though it was clear from her uniform that she did. "Yes," she replied with a small nod. "I do the night shift." Shaq glanced at the children, who were now watching the interaction with curious eyes. "And those are your kids?" Her eyes followed his, and for a moment, her expression softened into something more vulnerable, the practiced smile giving way to genuine maternal love. "Yes, sir. I don't have anyone to watch them, so I bring them with me. My manager's understanding, as long as they don't cause trouble." Shaq's brows furrowed, and he tilted his head slightly. "That's a lot to handle. What about their dad?" The question hung in the air for a moment before she answered. "He left," she said simply, her voice steady but low. "When he found out I was pregnant again, he decided he wasn't ready for more responsibility." She straightened her shoulders slightly. "It's just us now." Shaq nodded slowly, his gaze flicking between her and the children. "What's your name?" "Lauren," she replied. Then, gesturing to the children, she added, "And these are Jaden and Mia." Shaq crouched down to Jaden's level, his presence immediately captivating the boy who stared up at him with wide eyes. "What are you drawing there, big man?" he asked, his voice warm. Jaden held up his chalk drawing proudly, a colorful but messy picture of what looked like a house with multiple windows and a tall chimney. It's where we're going to live one day, he said brightly. A big house with lots of rooms. One for me, one for MIA, one for the new baby, and a special one for Mom where she can sleep without MIA kicking her. Shaq felt his chest tighten at the boy's innocent hope. The child's imagination created what his reality couldn't provide. A spacious home where his family could live comfortably. He stood up and turned back to Lauren, who was watching nervously, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her uniform shirt. Lauren, why don't you have a seat for a minute? Shaq suggested, gesturing to a nearby bench beside the air pump. I'm fine, really, she said quickly, glancing toward the store. I don't want to waste your time, and I should get back to work. You're not wasting anything, Shaq said firmly. Come on, just for a minute. Reluctantly, Lauren followed him to the bench, glancing over her shoulder at her children to make sure they were safe. Once seated, Shaq leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, making himself smaller, less intimidating. You work nights to take care of your kids, he began. You're about to have another one, and you're doing all this alone. That's not easy. Lauren shrugged slightly, her hands resting protectively on her belly. It's not easy, she admitted. But what choice do I have? They depend on me. She looked at her children with a mixture of love and worry. Jaden starts school in the fall. Mia's still so young. And this one, she patted her stomach, will be here in about 2 months. Shaq nodded, his respect for her growing with every word. Do you get any help? Family? Friends? She shook her head. My mom's in another state, and she's sick. I don't want to burden her. And friends. She trailed off, her meaning clear. When survival became the primary focus, friendships often fell by the wayside. What about government assistance? Shaq asked gently. Lauren's face flushed slightly. We get some food stamps. It helps, but it's not enough. The apartment, utilities, daycare when I can afford it. It all adds up. She looked down at her hands. I never thought I'd be in this position. I had dreams, you know? I wanted to be a chef. Shaq leaned back, letting out a slow breath. He had met countless people in his life. Celebrities, athletes, politicians. But something about Lauren and her quiet strength struck a chord with him. Here was someone fighting an uphill battle every day without fanfare or recognition, simply because her children needed her. Lauren, he said after a moment, his voice steady. I can't just drive away tonight and forget about this. I want to help. She looked at him, her brow furrowing in confusion. Help me? Why? Because I can, Shaq said simply. And because you deserve it. You're out here working hard, doing everything you can for your kids. That takes guts. Lauren's lips parted slightly as though she wanted to protest, but she didn't. Instead, she nodded, her shoulders slumping as though a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying had begun to lift. Let me do something for you, Shaq continued. I'll come back tomorrow, and we'll talk more. You don't have to do this alone. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. Thank you, she whispered. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Shaq replied with a kind smile. Just take care of those kids and yourself. I'll see you tomorrow. As he walked back to his SUV, Lauren watched him go, her mind racing. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Shaq drove home that night with Lauren and her children occupying his thoughts. He'd seen poverty before, had experienced it himself growing up in Newark, New Jersey. His mother had worked hard to provide for him and his siblings, instilling the values of education, respect, and perseverance. Perhaps that's why Lauren's situation resonated so deeply with him. When he reached his sprawling estate, the contrast between his life and Lauren's couldn't have been starker. His home was everything Jaden had drawn on the pavement. Spacious, comfortable, secure. As he walked through his front door, the emptiness of the house struck him. Despite his success, family had always been central to Shaq's life. Seeing Lauren fighting to keep hers together had touched something fundamental in him. That night, Shaq made several phone calls. First to his financial advisor, then to his foundation manager, and finally to a real estate agent he trusted. By the time he went to bed, a plan was forming, not just a handout, but a pathway to genuine change. The next evening, Shaquille O'Neal returned to the gas station, his SUV pulling into the same spot as before. The lot looked almost identical to the night before, but this time, Shaq wasn't here just to fill his tank. He stepped out of his car, carrying a large bag filled with groceries and a couple of toys for the kids. Lauren was at the far end of the station, assisting a customer with their windshield, her movements the same, steady and deliberate, but Shaq could see the weight on her shoulders from across the lot. As he approached, Jaden noticed him first, his face lighting up in recognition. "Mom!" Jaden called out, running toward Shaq. "It's the tall guy from last night." Lauren turned quickly, her eyes widening in surprise. "Shaq?" she asked, her voice a mixture of confusion and relief. She wiped her hands on her uniform and walked over, glancing at the bag in his hand. "What are you doing back here?" "I told you I'd come back," Shaq said with a warm smile, crouching to greet Jaden before standing again. "I brought some things for you and the kids. Thought you might need them." Lauren hesitated, her eyes flicking between Shaq and the bag. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "I can manage." "Lauren," Shaq said gently, "managing isn't living. Let me help you." She bit her lip, clearly conflicted, but eventually nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. Shaq handed her the bag and motioned toward the bench they had sat on the night before. "Let's talk for a bit," he said. "If you've got the time." She glanced at the station, where a coworker had just arrived to start their shift, and then at her children, who were now playing with the toys Shaq had brought. "I've got a few minutes," she said, sitting down. Shaq joined her, his large frame making the bench creak slightly. "I want to know more about you," he said. "How you got here." Lauren sighed, her hands resting on her lap. "It's not much of a story," she began. "Just life, I guess." "Tell me anyway," Shaq encouraged. "I've got time." Lauren hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I grew up in a small town," she said. "My mom raised me on her own. She worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, and I always admired her for that. But I swore I wouldn't end up in the same position. I wanted to do more, be more." She paused, her gaze distant, lost in memories. "I wanted to be a chef," she continued. "I loved cooking. My grandma used to teach me when I was little, and it became my escape. I even saved up to take a few classes after high school." Shaq nodded, listening intently. "What happened?" Lauren's expression grew somber. "Life happened," she said. "I met my husband, got pregnant with Jaden, and had to put my dreams on hold. It wasn't so bad at first. We were happy. But then MIA came along, and things got harder. My husband started pulling away, saying he couldn't handle the stress. And when I told him I was pregnant again..." Her voice broke slightly, but she quickly composed herself. "He left. Since then, it's just been me and the kids." She gestured vaguely toward the gas station. "I do what I can. The gas station job isn't much, but it pays the bills, barely. I bring the kids here because I don't have anyone else to watch them. It's not ideal, but we get by." Shaq's jaw tightened as he absorbed her words. Her story wasn't unique. It was one he had heard before in different forms from countless people struggling to make ends meet. But hearing it directly from Lauren, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes and the determination in her voice, made it hit differently. "You've been through a lot," Shaq said after a moment, "but you're still standing. That says a lot about you." Lauren managed a small smile. "What choice do I have?" she asked. "My kids depend on me. They're my whole world." Shaq glanced at Jaden and MIA, who were now playing a game of tag near the gas station's edge, their laughter echoing in the cool night air, a stark contrast to the weight of their mother's story. "What about your dreams?" Shaq asked. "Do you still want to be a chef?" Lauren hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her uniform. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes it feels too far away, like something that belongs to another life. Right now, I'm just trying to survive. Shaq leaned forward, his gaze steady. Lauren, dreams don't have to stay dreams. You've got what it takes. I can see that. You just need a little help. She looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. Why would you want to help me? She asked. You don't even know me. Because I can, Shaq said simply. And because you deserve it. Your kids deserve it. Lauren blinked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Shaq replied. Just trust me. I've got a few ideas to make things easier for you. They sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the gas station filling the air. Lauren finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you, she said. I don't know why, but thank you. Shaq smiled. It's just the beginning, Lauren. We're going to get you back on your feet. As he stood to leave, Lauren watched him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. She had no idea what he had in mind, but for the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her, a glimmer of hope. Shaq walked back to his SUV, his mind already racing with plans. He knew this wasn't going to be a quick fix, but he was determined to do whatever it took. Lauren and her kids deserved more than just survival. They deserved a chance to thrive, and Shaq was going to make sure they got it. The next day, Lauren awoke to the sound of Mia's giggles. The little girl was playing with the stuffed elephant Shaq had brought, a plush toy bigger than she was. Jaden sat nearby, carefully arranging the set of toy cars he'd received. For a moment, Lauren allowed herself to simply watch her children, their joy a balm to her weary spirit. The reality of their situation quickly returned as she glanced at the clock. She had to get the kids ready, drop them at a neighbor's apartment, and head to her morning job cleaning offices. The gas station was her evening shift. During the day, she scrubbed toilets and vacuumed carpets in corporate buildings downtown. It barely paid enough to justify the childcare costs, but every dollar counted. As she hustled the children through their morning routine, Lauren couldn't help but wonder if Shaq would really return as promised. She'd learned the hard way not to count on people's